Hello and welcome to Books to Last, the podcast that challenges readers to pick the only 5 books they may take with them when cast away to a mystery remote location. As always, I am joined by a book-loving guest, and this episode I am joined by V. Welcome, V. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. I'm so grateful that you've given up your time to come and talk to me. So I know you through Goodreads. You were quite possibly my first ever friend on Goodreads. I was thinking about it the other day, and I think it might be
Really?
the case. I'm definitely one of the first up there. And I was thinking about it when I was preparing for the recording earlier, and I was like, I actually think that might be the case because I can remember your name in my Goodreads feed for as long as I've been on there, as far as I'm concerned.
Wow,
But
that's a long time.
for the benefit of any listeners who might not be familiar with you and your excellent reviews, why don't you introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about what you do and how much you love books?
Well, first of all, thanks for reading my reviews. That's always so nice to hear when people read my reviews and enjoy them. That's always so nice. And well, my name is V. I'm from the Sassy Library Fox, which is a booktube channel, but also a book blog. I actually had the blog long before I started my booktube channel. And I've been writing reviews. I think I joined on Goodreads in 2017. So ever since that day and in July, I think I kind of discovered the world of reading. I mean, I've always been a reader, but I didn't even know a place like Goodreads exists until someone told me, and I got there, and it was so nice to be a part of that community and to read reviews there. And so I started to write my reviews as well and found a lot of book loving friends there, which is always good because in real life there aren't that many people who read, in my vicinity at least, or in the family.
It's
So yeah.
very much the same for me. I joined sort of Instagram and Twitter and found a lot of people who liked books through there because I'm the same. I don't have a lot of family or friends who read. I mean, I do have friends who read a bit, but I don't know. You can never have enough. You can never have enough friends who love books, really. So it's always great.
It's true.
It's always great to have new people to talk to about books. So what was the last really good book that you remember reading?
The last really good book that I remember reading is actually on the list
We
of
can
the
leave
5
it
books.
then. If you want to save it for a surprise, how about you tell the listeners what kind of books you generally like to read? What are some of your favorite genres, or do you read a bit of everything?
I generally read a lot of everything, I think, but I read a lot of young adult and LGBTQIA plus books.
Great
those
books.
those are really the two genres I read a lot about. And also fantasy is, I think I started with fantasy. It was one of the first genres I ever read when I was a child. So fantasy will always have a special place in my heart. But I think what I don't read all too much are thrillers.
Same.
Yeah, that's a genre I just can't get warm with. It's too horrible to read for me.
I think, and it's so strange because they're so common, like not common, popular. You see so many thriller and sort of crime thrillers
Yeah.
in bookstores. They're the kind of books you can get everywhere, and it's just one genre that I've never really. It's just never appealed.
Yeah, I don't know. There are some thrillers I can read, but I think a lot of books I can't read anymore ever since I got a kid. Because a lot of those thrillers have to do with child abduction or children that go missing and all those things, or horrible children that are creepy. So that's really not my kind of genre.
Yeah, it does change your perception on some things when you have a little one. I was after I had my son, I suddenly had a different view on sort of children characters because I didn't know many kids before I had my son. So whenever I read a book with a child character in it, it was I could kind of tell when it was being done well all of a sudden, because before then, if they told me a kid said that, I would just be like, okay, a kid said that. And then when I read it now, I sort of think, I'm like, a 2-year-old kid did not say that.
Yeah, that's often the trouble I have when I read books with children in them, because they usually aren't represented in a way that's I don't know, their age.
Yeah, it's I think it's hard to write children well because yeah, they're tricky. I mean, and no two kids are the same as well, so it is quite hard to just do
Yeah,
it
that's
in
true.
general. But so pretty much a bit of everything except probably thrillers. So I'm looking forward to what your list is going to entail. I imagine it's going to be quite a mixed bag, which is always my favorite kind. So, as mentioned before, you are going to be cast away forever with your 5 books. And as ever, you are not forced to go to a desert island because this podcast is an anti desert island podcast. Though I think I've published a recent episode where I did admit that I'd been on a beach that recently and the sand wasn't as bad as I remember it being. So maybe we're not as anti desert island as we used to be. But you still get to pick your castaway location. Is there a particular place, remote place in mind that you'd love to go to read your books?
A library.
A secret library that no one can go to but you.
Yeah, exactly. A secret library. That would be perfect, where I can sit down in a reading niche and yeah,
But
just
also, all the other books are locked away because you can only have your 5 books.
exactly. Yeah, you're right. I would have to lock away all the other books, or the other books would have to be locked away. Or I just go to a cozy cottage as a
Cottages,
second option, where there are just those 5 books.
cottages are very popular as well. We like a cottage. I've never been one for reading in public, but recently I went away and I had the opportunity to sort of sit in a town centre and read a lot, and it was weirdly fun. I wasn't expecting it, so yeah. Um, but I think a private place, a nice cottage or a library with no books in it, just all shelves.
That's a new thing. We should make this a thing. A library with no books.
Or just hundreds of copies of just your 5 books. So there's just only those 5 books.
That could turn out to be a little bit creepy, but we are already in October, so why not?
Yeah, oh, okay. Yeah, someone needs to write like a short story where it's a book lover's worst nightmare, where they go into a library and it's filled with only 5 books and it's the same over and over again.
Yeah, someone has to write that story. Maybe an author listens and will
Maybe
write it.
they can have that one. They just have to let us know how it turns out.
Exactly. We want to read that one.
Yes. Okay, so since you've already hinted that you read a recent book that has made your list, I suppose we should probably dive straight in. So, what is the first book you will be taking to your library in a cottage?
Well, the first book I would take, and that instantly came to mind, is actually a book that I've read the first time when I was 15, I think, or so, and I've read it a couple of times over the years. And it's my favorite book, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And I don't know, there's something about this book that still resonates with me. I read it the first time when I was 15, and I think the last time I read it was about 2 years ago or so. And the interesting thing is, no matter how often I read it, it's always different, or I find different aspects in the book. And maybe it says something of me as a person and my growth. But yeah.
I think that's the beauty of classics, isn't it? Because the reason why they've stood the test of time and people still read them now, like hundreds of years after they were written, is because you can keep taking different things from them. And I think they're the best kind of books. I've never read The Picture of Dorian Gray, which
Wow.
so I have always wanted to. It's one of those ones. So you know the 100 books you should read before you die, and it's on the
Yeah.
list. And I'm definitely making my way through that list. I'm doing better than I was. Um, it's actually kind of a bit of a spooky read, isn't it, in a way? So maybe it's
In
the
a
right time of
way.
year to pick it up. Ominous, maybe
Yeah.
a better word.
I don't think it's that spooky, but if you like less spooky books, then that would be a good Halloween read. And I know it's a classic that a lot of people have read, and everyone has their own interpretation of the book, which is amazing. I mean, that's typical for classics. And for me, it was really interesting because I think it kind of caused me to drop into the villains and morally gray characters, because it was the first book I ever read that had totally morally gray characters. And I think the book alone is so interesting from the characters perspective. We have Lord Henry, we have Dorian Gray, and we have Basil, and every character is different in their own way. But yeah, the way they get corrupted over the years is so interesting, especially Dorian, because he gets painted by Basil and yeah, stays forever young. That's basically the main plot of the story. But there's so much to take from this book.
Yeah, it's definitely, well, it's a book that a lot of people kind of already know what it's about because it's so huge and because so many people have read it, and there's a lot of sort of nods to it in pop culture, and it's something that's been sort of made and remade a lot of times.
Yeah.
It's definitely, yeah, it's definitely one that's up there, and morally great characters is something that is it's very popular now, I think. I don't know if it was more I love a morally grey character in a book, mainly because I'm so not morally grey in my own life.
Yeah, I think that's why we all love them.
So for me, I live very much in the black and white in terms of morals and good, you know. So for me personally, I love those kind of characters in books in a way that if I were sort of using the logical part of my brain, I'd probably go, yeah, but if I met them in real life, I wouldn't like them probably.
That's most of the time the things. But quite honestly, it would be really interesting and fascinating to meet Lord Henry or Dorian Gray in real life, because I think you could talk about very interesting things with them.
I'm
So those two I wouldn't mind meeting.
so in your fictional dinner party where you can invite anyone you want,
Yeah, exactly.
they make the list.
Definitely.
Well, it's a very iconic and interesting start to your list. So, what would be the second book joining The Picture of Dorian Gray?
The second book would be the book I recently read, and that instantly made it on my top list. And this is Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. And it's a really interesting story because it's basically about a boy named Benji, and Benji is trans, and he survived the end of the world. And it was kind of initiated by a cult, and he is the son of the cult leader and gets infected with a virus and flees that cult and lands in the local LGBTQIA plus center. So that one is a really, it sounds like a wild story, and it
does.
is. It is. It's really a wild story, but it unpacks so many topics. It's really a great story. I mean, it's pretty gory. If you don't like that kind of thing, you should definitely not read that book.
But a good horror read again for Halloween.
It's a good horror read, yes. I even recommended it for Rainbow Beam because it fits perfectly for that.
Yeah, it sounds like it would. I mean, apocalypse stories are always interesting. That's a new lens. That's not one I've heard before.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting because it also has a huge religious aspect with it, and a lot of LGBTQI plus representations that you usually don't see on page. And a lot of the things were very relatable to me. So it's really an interesting book and something totally different.
It sounds really interesting. Is that quite a new release that you've read, or is it sort of something you've been meaning to get to for a while? And
I think it's been out since 2021, so one of the more recent releases in comparison to the picture of Dorian Gray.
yeah, yeah, just a bit. Well, I mean, I'm terrible at reading new releases. I pre-order a lot of books, but I never read them when I get them. I sort of read them 3 years later.
I totally get it. I'm the same. I'm always late to the party.
Yeah, I like to read them when everyone's forgotten about them. But it sounds like, I mean, you're bringing a lot of diversity to the list, so there's a big difference so far. Although, yeah, I mean, LGBTQ representation is always really great to have, and I like that they've sort of meshed it with like a gory sort of apocalypse, but also topical. No, that's yeah, it's a really there's a lot going on there. I actually think I might have to stop being such a baby and see if I can get through the gory bits.
It's really good. It's very good, but I don't know, if you have problems with zombie movies, you might not want to read that one.
So I find zombie movies silly, so I might actually be okay.
Okay, then you could try it.
Yeah, it's I mean, I say I've got a problem with gore, but I mean, a lot of fantasy books can get very graphic in sort of fight scenes. So you know what, I might be okay. And it sounds, yeah, that sounds like a really interesting read. I bet it's got a really good cover as well. It just screams.
Oh yes, it has an amazing cover. The cover is awesome.
You've got so much to work with. If you didn't have a good cover, what was the cover designer doing? Really?
Exactly. With this book, it works really well. It's an amazing cover. Yeah.
Excellent. So we've got an aristocratic. God, I'll try and say that again. Aristocratic, morally grey characters being corrupted over time, and then we've got trans characters surviving the apocalypse through avoiding cults and all sorts
deadly virus.
Yeah, and a deadly virus. Oh god, yeah, no. I mean, 2021. I imagine there's a lot of books in 2021 that have
Oh
Some
yes, I think so too. There might have been an increase of those books.
Yeah, I wonder what brought that on. Honestly, it's very strange. I can't imagine what.
I honestly admire the people that managed to read books like that in 2020
Mhm,
because I mean I read Dry from Neil Schusterman
mhm.
in 2020 and it was already I decided after that book, I mean it was good, but I decided I wouldn't read a book like that in 2020 anymore.
Yeah, so I did the same. I bought the Decameron by got Giovanni Boccaccio, I think is his name, which was written during the Black Death in like sort of the plague going through Europe, and it's about them sort of going like 10 young people going to quarantine in a big house, and they tell each other stories to escape the plague.
Mhm.
And I thought that would be great, and then it arrived, and I found that I suddenly didn't want to read it. So I did read it recently. I'm glad I didn't read it during the pandemic. But yeah, it's interesting how some people coped by reading about plagues and some people avoided it like the plague. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, I imagine a lot of interesting stories came out of that because lots of creative people got a lot of time that they might not have gotten to sort of sit and think about things and write stories, which is quite nice as well. And also, some people just rested for a year, which is also a great way of spending that
Yeah,
year as well.
that's true.
Okay, so I know I certainly didn't do anything that productive during 2020.
I still had to work, but it was
Same, because I worked from
less work.
home. So
Yeah, yeah, work from home was very popular in that year.
yeah, weirdly, I barely read in 2020 as well. Like, I would have thought I would have read lots, but I
Mhm.
I just didn't. Yeah, I didn't do a lot of things in 2020. Anyway, we're in 2023. We're almost in 2024. We're gonna leave that in the past. What is
Good
the
idea.
what is the third book that you'll be taking with you to your cottage library? We're gonna merge them. It's a library and
The
a
creepy
cottage.
cottage library. Well, I was born for this by Alice Oseman, which is an entirely different genre once again. Because it's basically a book that's about a band named the Ark, and they are just really famous. And Angel, a fan of them, wants to meet them at a fan meeting, and then she gets closer than she initially thought. And for a couple of days, she becomes a part of their life due different circumstances. Not gonna spoil anything,
Okay.
but I really love that book because it has that band and musical aspect in it, and it's just Alice Oseman's books are always so great, and she captured the fandom so well in this book. I had to pick a book that focuses on music because I just love music in my books, and that one was really done well.
That's really good. So Alice Oseman wrote the Heartstopper series, didn't she? And
Yes, she did.
is it called? Oh, I've forgotten the name. Is it Radios? Okay,
Radio Silence.
Radio Silence. Right. So look at me knowing all these Alice. I've never read an Alice Oseman book, but look at me knowing them all. Um,
Okay,
so
you're missing out.
yeah, I know. It's it's one of those where it's like some authors I kind of know that I will love so much of their stuff that if I start reading one, I'll have to read them all, and then it'll
Oh
take over my
yeah,
life for a few months.
I feel you on that one.
Have you read a lot of her other stuff?
Yes, I think I've read all of her stuff. The last book of her I read was Loveless, I think. And all the other books I've read so far, yes, I think I'm through all of her books.
Excellent. So what makes this the favorite? Is it the music? Is it the characters?
It's the music and the characters, and also how the fandom is portrayed. And I really liked that the fandom was such a huge part of it. I'm also a fan. Yeah, I'm a part of a fandom. I'm a huge BTS fan.
Oh, you're part of the BTS army.
Yeah. And yeah, if you come to my channel, there's no way around it. So that resonated a lot with me. But also, I've been in a band when I was younger, or actually I was in two bands, and the band live and recording, and basically that the band is your family, and it is that way. That's done so well in this book, and it portrays it so well. So yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, both. I mean, fandom, because I mean, I'm part of a lot of book fandoms and I've got a lot of music that I really enjoy, but I feel like I don't always have the same level of fandom with music as I do with books. But I find it really interesting to see from the outside because I I mean, I like a lot of music that just have huge followings behind it because I'm sort of into like rock music and pop punk and that sort of thing, which has its very own distinct following.
Yeah, definitely.
Very different to BTS's, but still lots of really good, fun people. And but I like to sort of I love it when people are passionate about things. So fandoms are just in general are just really fun for me because it's really nice to see people with stuff they love. So I imagine exploring that through a book with about music would be really good because as you were talking about a book about a band, I recently read Daisy Jones and the Six, which is
I've
very
read
much,
that one too.
yeah, it's less about the fans and very much more about the band sort of internal
Yeah.
drama, which is different, I think.
That's true. It.
Uh,
I actually thought about putting Daisy Jones on the list, but then I decided for I Was Born for This because it resonated more with me. Because in Daisy Jones, it's really a lot of internal drama in the band. They did a great music rap as well with the process of writing songs. I really like that they included or that it was included by Taylor
yeah.
Jenkins Reid in the book. But yeah, lots of drama.
Yeah, my husband's a drummer and I found myself sort of sending him lots of quotes from that because I knew he would get them even if I didn't. So I imagine I Was Born for This would probably be very similar. But I would be interested in doing because I'd like to say I think it's an interesting concept. And I think I've never been part of a band because I have no musical talent at all. I cannot keep a beat. I cannot carry a tune. I can't
Okay.
I cannot music. I listen to music. I don't make music of any description. Um but I find bands really interesting, creative sort of groups, which is it's always really fun to read about. And I think create the sort of creative process, like you say, with writing songs and music and stuff is it's similar to stories and books in a way because they're both trying to get a message across. And
Yeah, that's
yeah.
true. You can get a lot of messages through with music.
And people interpret them differently at different times in their lives.
Yeah, same with books.
Well, um, oh, I feel like I'm gonna ask you a surprise question at the end of this list now, because
Okay.
you've expressed a love of music. I'll let you know so that you can think about it. But so the inspiration for this podcast was Desert Island Discs, where they pick 6 tracks to take to the desert island, and they can pick
Ooh.
one book. Now, I'm a bit stingier. I only give you 5 books, but I recently went to Cheltenham Literature Festival, and they did a desert island books where they did 6 books and 1 track.
Hmm.
So if you could take one song with you to the island, you can save it till
Ooh.
the end, but you can pick one song at the end to go with your also 5 books.
Oh my gosh, that's going to be so hard.
Try not to let it distract you for the rest of your list. That was probably unfair of me. I should probably add that to the format. I'll make a note.
To make it even harder.
Yeah, just to make it even harder, just throw a curve.
I'm very sorry for everyone who's going to be on your podcast after me if you add that to the
No,
list.
you are the inspiration, and it will be. I will give them your details so that they can express their unhappiness.
I apologize beforehand.
Okie doke. So we're on to book 4. What is the 4th book that you'll be taking with you?
That's something completely different once again. And it's An Exaltation of Larks by Suanne Laqueur. And this book is very different. You might I got it as an ARC a couple of years ago, and I absolutely fell in love with the writing style and with the story that was told. So Anne Laqueur has a way to write really good reality. You feel the characters, and it's really relatable. It's so relatable. And this book, she wrote a lot of books, but this book is about, in some way, it's about 3 people, 2 men and a woman. And how to describe it? It's really hard. It kind of plays or spans over a lot of years. And it starts in September 11th, 1973, with the coup in Chile. And it also draws a parallel to 9/11, because the date is the same. It's both September 11th, and the author kind of managed to pull it off that she had all those lives in the span of those years. And it's a very unique and interesting way to write about characters. And Alex and Valerie meet after that coup, and he's taken in by the Larks because his parents went missing during the coup, and he was brought to America. And then he falls in love with their daughter Valerie. And a couple of years later, they befriend New York's top escort, Javier. And it's such a great and moving story, and it spans over a couple of decades, and it's really great. It's amazing. And yeah, well, Suanne is a very underrated author, I think, because barely anyone knows her books.
I can't say I've ever heard of this one. I mean, the title sounded familiar when you said it, but hearing the story, I don't think I have. But it sounds gorgeous from how you describe it. And I've recently found it very interesting sort of hearing about these books set during less well-known historical events, or at least less well-known in my part of the world. So sure you're aware, England's very self-obsessed. They like they like to think about their own stories and their own history and ignore everything else. So things like this, books that are set in times like this, things like, the coup in Chile and all that sort of thing, it's not something that would have registered very highly on the general consciousness of things. So I'm finding it really interesting to sort of deep dive into these moments in history that were very significant to other parts of the world, to where I live, and really sort of learn about them, and just sort of read about them, because even if you don't learn the exact history, just sort of understanding the perspective of someone who does understand it can be really nice.
Suanne really does her research. It's really you really feel with the characters, and it's done really great. So I always have difficulties to describe her books, because she always has something historical or a very interesting representation in her books, and it's so hard to describe those books. I'm doing a really poor job at telling what it is about.
Well, it sounds like it's like because of it's not quite historical fiction, but it's also not quite like romance. It's like literature where they sort of transcend and go above lots of different genres. And I always find literature books really hard to describe as well. Like whenever anyone asks me to describe a literary book, I'm like, it's just a story about people.
Yeah, but that's basically the heart of her books, I
Yeah.
think. She really writes about real people and families and their bonds throughout the ages and years. And that is really something she excels at. And that really pulls at your heartstrings.
I was going to ask, is it an emotional book? Is it a book that's going to
Oh,
make you
yes.
cry?
I cried at some of the scenes. I cried bucket of tears. It was really heart-wrenching. I called it heart-wrenching realism because I think that explains it really well.
I mean, it sounds accurate from what you've said. Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting one, and it's an author I should probably check out because, like you say, it seems like she's not getting her due. So maybe,
Yeah, definitely. I think more people should read her books. They are great, and she does a lot of research. She also wrote A Small Hotel, and that book is about World War I and a family that sent their children into the war and lost some of them. And it's also a family story. I think that's the common thing all of Suanne's books have together, and in common the family, yeah, and the bonds.
yeah. And that's always that's nice to read about. Okay, well, we've got to the fifth and final book on your list, and we've got quite some range in the list so far. So,
Yeah, I think that one won't be any different, or it will fit into the wide range perfectly. Um, well, I you said I can only take one book with me, even if it's a series, and I wouldn't be me if I would take that, or if I wouldn't take that book with me. And it's the last book of All for the Game, and it's The King's Men by Norris Akavich. And I loved that series so much. And quite honestly, I could live without book 1 and 2. It would hurt a lot, but going to that remote place without one of those books would hurt more. So
and
I had to take it with me.
and it's the last one. That's unusual for a series. Like, well, a lot of people either go for sort of the first or I suppose the last. I mean, I always find it really unusual when someone goes for sort of 2 or 3. um, so, I mean, what's that series about?
It's basically about the boy named Neil Joston, and Neil Joston isn't his real name because he's been on the run from the mafia and his father for quite a couple of years. His mom and him fled them and the life they led, and he plays a fictional sport named Exy. And that's the only thing he really likes to do, and he does it every school he goes to. And then he gets scouted by the captain, or the coach actually, and the captain of the team of misfits that takes people with a troubled past into their team and becomes a part of that team because he can't resist, but he's still on the run, so that might bring some complications. And it's about found family. It's a strong found family in the book with the team and the teammates, and it's also very suspenseful, I think, because of the entire mafia
Yeah,
story.
that'll do it if you want you want to add threats.
And I especially chose the last book because in the last book everything comes together so nicely. And yeah, I just love the last book so much. There are amazing quotes in there. And I think the interesting thing is that this series was self-published by Norris Akavich, but there are fans all over the world, and it just got a revival. Every couple of years there's a revival, and there are typos in the book. It has all the trigger warnings in the world. If you can imagine a trigger warning, it will be in this series.
That's good to flag off.
But it has something that resonates with everyone apparently, because the characters in there, they curse, they smoke, they drink, yeah, they
They're
aren't.
imperfect.
Yeah, they're totally imperfect, but I think that's what resonates with so many people, that they are imperfect, that they have their troubles and their troubled pasts, but they are still trying to go on, and that they are still playing Xe and do something with their life.
Excellent. I mean, there's a lot of imperfect characters in your list. I would probably venture to guess. I think there's a lot of exploration of imperfect yet endearing individuals. um, so that's I think that's a really nice sort of thing to have running through. So I mean, for the benefit of any listeners who are off to the bookshop now and they want a list of stuff to pick up, what are the 5 books that you've picked? If we just recap them for them.
Okay, so the first book was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Then I chose Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. And I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. And then I went for An Exaltation of Larks by Suanne Laqueur. And the last book I mentioned was The King's Man by Nora Stakevich, which is actually the last book in the series. So they probably should buy the first one and the second one first.
Good advice. Otherwise, you might get some spoilers. Okay, so those are your 5 picks that you are taking with you. What are any books that you nearly picked but you didn't quite?
I almost picked The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. That one was already on the list, and then I scratched it from the list again. There were so many books I wanted to pick, but the problem is I'm a person that loves to read series, so I could have chosen so many books from series to take with me, but yeah, we said just 5 books, so I held to that list.
Yeah, we've had many people try and take the entire works of Shakespeare, and we're very strict with this rule that you can only take 1 for each slot.
But, well, the first book of the Raven Cycle was on the list as well, The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I love her books. They're so good.
The Raven Cycle is like a podcast favorite series. Like, so many people on this that come onto the podcast to pick their books, pick the Raven Cycle, but not just the first one. I think every book from the series has been picked by someone.
Yeah.
Like, all of them have been picked for different reasons by different people.
Okay.
And I just, there's just something about that series clearly that, like, because so many, it's very, very popular with specifically people who come on this podcast, but also the wider public as well.
I find it really interesting because it's one of those series I wouldn't recommend to everyone, because it is amazing and it is very well written and it has that lyrical, poetical writing style. But a lot of people don't like that. So I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. So I think it's interesting that a lot of people still chose it.
That's a good warning to people thinking about picking it up, but it isn't that much of a fan of that style of writing. So, okay, so those were your honorable mentions, and we did mention, what if you could take one song with you, one record, to listen to, I suppose, on repeat. God, it does sound awful, doesn't it? This castaway situation. What would this song be? What's your jam, as they say? I don't think anyone says that anymore.
It really would have to be a song I could listen to all day. Oh my god, that's a really tough one, but I think I would definitely have to pick one from BTS.
Yeah, fair.
So I can narrow it down to BTS.
That's fair.
And
I will. You could always take an album, one of BTS's albums, and then that's maybe a bit more fair. So then you've got a full record that you can put on a, I don't know, a
okay.
record player or a CD player.
It would be mean to say their anthology album, right?
Well, I suppose since we can't bend the rules with the books, maybe we can bend the rules with the music.
but their proof album. I mean, it doesn't have all their songs. It's just an anthology album with their most famous songs. So I think that could work.
That's fair. I mean, my my other half always cheats when he's asked what his favorite Fall Out Boy album is, because he says "Believers Never Die" because it's their greatest hits album. So of course, it's good. You know, you're getting the best one in one hit there. Okay then. So you talked a little bit about some of the books you like. If listeners wanted to come and read your book reviews and hear more about more books that you really like, where could they come and find you?
Well, they can find me on the Sassy Library Fox on BookTube. I have a channel there on YouTube. And they could also find me on Instagram under the Sassy Library Free. Also on my blog, which is also called the Sassy Library Fox. I think that's
Great branding.
Yeah, I've been told that. You can find me everywhere there, except of on Goodreads. On Goodreads, I write reviews under the name Virginia Ronan Herondale. So you might find me there.
I think that was probably one of the main reasons we ended up being friends on Goodreads, because we do not know each other in real life. Yeah. But I am a massive fan of Will Herondale, so I feel like I probably saw that username and said, I think we can be friends.
Yeah, I think that might have been the reason.
Well, it's been amazing talking to you about books. I recommend all listeners go and check out all of your places. As I say, I've been a long time reader of your reviews. They always make me laugh, and you're just a great follow on Goodreads because you're always very active on there and sort of supporting people through their own reading goals, which is also really, really good of you. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, if you want to find the podcast, we're on all the places where good podcasts are found. And we're at Books to Last Pod on all our social medias. Mainly Instagram is the best one. And if you liked this episode, recommend it to a friend, and I don't know, review if you really feel like you want to. But V, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. It's been amazing. And listeners, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.